Hello everyone, my name is Dixon, and today for this Module 3 presentation, we will be talking about understanding the competency to plead guilty. So to begin, we should establish what does it mean to be competent to plead guilty. Based on my understanding, I believe an appropriate definition to be the defendant's cognitive and mental abilities to understand the charges presented against them and what possible punishments could arise from that plea, as well as if they are capable of making an informed and voluntary decision about making a guilty plea. Additionally, there are two types of competencies. There's the adjudicative competence, which is defined as a competence to proceed. And this means that the defendant must be able to completely understand the legal proceedings, as well as having the ability of participating in those legal proceedings. Another category is decisional competence, which can be identified as the ability to make a decision. Therefore, with regards to pleading guilty, as the defendant is required to make that decision on their own, it would be under the decisional competence branch. So why does understanding competency to plead guilty matter? Well, 90% of criminal cases, the defendant pleads guilty, resulting in no trial. Additionally, this is a vital role where psychologists come in. Psychologists can often be responsible in conducting the evaluations to determine that the defendant is competent to plead guilty. Through these professionals, it can help ensure that the legal system is fair and just for everyone, regardless of any possible cognitive impairments or mental illness. Now let's discuss the legal standard of competency to plead guilty. There are three important aspects which we've already somewhat touched on in the definition, but the defendant must be making the guilty plea voluntarily, meaning nobody has coerced them, they are making this decision on their own. The defendant must also be making this decision knowingly and intelligently. So like we just talked about in the previous slide, the decision to plead guilty must be made knowingly, and to help establish that, there are three key elements that must be considered according to the Supreme Court. One is that the defendant must understand the nature of the crime that they are pleading guilty for. The second is that the defendant must understand the possible punishment that they could receive if they plead guilty. And the third element is that the individual must realize and understand that the rights that they are giving up by pleading guilty. This includes the right to remain silent, the right to confront one's accuser, the right to a jury trial, and the right to counsel. And this decision must be completed by the judge at a plea hearing and on the record. So let's better understand the elements that we just discussed. So again, it's broken down into a few important fields. These concepts can be evaluated by psychologists to help determine and establish whether or not the individual is in fact competent to plead guilty. So the first element on our list here is the comprehension of the plea. So this is also known as the knowing part, and can help determine that the defendant fully understands what the plea means and grasp the possible repercussions that could arise based on this guilty plea. So therefore, the psychologist can evaluate the defendant's cognitive abilities, which again is touching on the defendant's understanding and ability to process the information that is relevant to the legal proceedings. Additionally, again, like we discussed, to plead guilty, it must be a decision made voluntarily and not coerced. So the decision must be the defendant's and the defendant's alone. Psychologists can evaluate this aspect to ensure this element is met in helping determine whether the defendant is in fact competent to plead guilty. However, sometimes this can be a bit of concern as the defendants will feel that they have no other options other than to plead guilty. So this can sometimes raise other questions and concerns, which would be an interesting topic to discuss at a later date. The other part that must be evaluated and understood is the defendant's reasoning for pleading guilty. If the defendant appears to be logical regarding the reasoning of why, It can help establish that they understood the decision that they were making. Again, this is another vital portion that can be evaluated by the psychologist. So to help the psychologist and to determine competence, the MacArthur Competence Assessment Tool was established and is frequently utilized. This tool helps assess if defendants are competent to proceed, as well as determining whether the decision to plead guilty and waive their rights was made by free will. This tool examines the reasons behind why somebody might plead guilty and help determine whether the decision made by the defendant was rationally made or irrationally. An example stated in the textbook that this tool would help differentiate between the rational comments, such as someone pleading guilty because they signed a confession, opposed to the irrational comment that someone might make, such as they are pleading guilty because they're the world's largest sinner. So this tool can help differentiate the two, which ultimately helps the evaluations. Now we will talk about a case that is essential for better understanding the competence to plead guilty. This case can be found in the textbook, so if you're curious and hoping to learn more, definitely go check it out because it breaks down the key components of competency to plead guilty very well. This case, as some of you may already know and may have already heard of, but in summary, Tom Moran on the August 2nd shot and killed a bartender along with a patron and then continued to steal money from the cash register. 9 days later, he then went into his ex-wife's house and shot her, which resulted in her dying, and after he attempted suicide. Tom was appointed counsel, and he pled initially not guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. And importantly, at this time, Tom was found to be fit to stand trial. Then, out of the blue, 2.5 months later, Tom decides that he wants to plead guilty and self-represent as he didn't approve his counsel's plan. The judge in this case struggled to believe that Tom was competent to make these decisions, as it was explained in the case that Tom had difficulty with understanding some of the terms utilized, such as deliberate. Additionally, we must remember that Tom was also on some medication and appeared to have a noticeable change in view with regards to the outcome of the trial. This could provide some red flags when assessing someone for competency to plead guilty. They did, however, find that he was competent to plead guilty after holding a competency trial. For my media source, I've decided to use the real-life case of Michelle Blair, which you can find the link to the YouTube video in the description of this video below. Michelle Blair's case is certainly an interesting one, in a situation that would definitely pull in some heartstrings. Michelle pled guilty for torturing and killing 2 of her children and placing them in a freezer. Based on this guilty plea, she was sentenced to life. However, in this video of Dr. Gerald Shiner, he does a fantastic job of breaking down what it means to actually be competent to plead guilty, and more specifically how this affected Michelle's case. Again, this link can be found in the description box in this video below. Although competency to plead guilty is such a vast topic, and we could sit here and just continue discussing it for longer, to end the presentation, I'd like to leave you with a question to kind of think about. This is one of the questions that I've had consistently throughout this assignment, and would love to hear any suggestions or possible solutions that you might have. So, do you believe that there could be any improvements in the assessment of competence of pleading guilty, specifically determining voluntariness? If so, what change or changes do you think could be done to help with this improvement? Here are all the references that I used for this project. And thank you everyone for listening. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.